The knock on my door came just after midnight. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, desperate pounding that rattled the old wood of the frame. My heart jumped into my throat. I lived on a quiet, secluded road where no one ever came by unannounced, especially not in the middle of a storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, a loud, angry drumming against the roof. I peered through the peephole but could only see a distorted shape, a figure huddled against the driving rain. I hesitated for a second, then undid the locks. A part of me knew, even before I saw her, that deep, unspoken connection that twins have was screaming at me. I opened the door, and my world tilted on its axis. It was my sister Chloe, my identical twin. She was drenched, her blonde hair plastered to her face, her body trembling so hard I could see it. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my chest. It was her face. Her beautiful face, the one that was an exact copy of my own, was a nightmare of purple and blue. A dark, swollen bruise bloomed under her left eye. Her bottom lip was split and bloody, and a raw, red mark marred the line of her jaw. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it felt like I was staring into a deep, dark well. "Jenna," she whispered, her voice a broken, raspy thing. Then she collapsed forward into my arms. I pulled her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind and rain. She was lighter than I remembered, fragile as a bird. I guided her to the sofa, my mind a whirlwind of shock and a rising, hot tide of rage. I wrapped her in a thick blanket and went to the kitchen to get my first aid kit, my hands moving on autopilot. As I cleaned the cut on her lip with a gentle touch, she flinched away, a small, wounded animal sound escaping her throat. "It's okay," I murmured, my voice softer than I felt. "It's just me. You're safe now." She finally looked at me, really looked at me, and the dam broke. The story came out in a torrent of sobs and choked whispers. It was about her husband, Alex, the perfect man. The successful, charming businessman who had swept my gentle sister off her feet. I had never liked him. I had always felt a coldness beneath his polished smile, a possessiveness in the way he held my sister's hand. But Chloe was in love, and she hadn't seen it. She told me it started with words, with him telling her she was stupid, that she was lucky he put up with her. Then it became control, taking her credit cards, checking her phone, isolating her from her friends. And then, tonight, it had become this. He had been angry about something small and stupid, and he had hit her, not once, but over and over. I listened, and with every word she spoke, the shock in my heart cooled and hardened into something else. It was a cold, heavy stone of fury. I looked at the ugly marks on her delicate skin, on the face that was my own, and I felt every blow as if it had landed on me. I didn't just want her to be safe. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to pay for every tear, every bruise, every second of fear he had inflicted on my sister. After she had cried herself to sleep, exhausted and broken on my sofa, I went into the bathroom and stared at my own reflection. I saw my face, untouched and clear, and then I pictured Chloe's face, bruised and swollen. We were identical, two sides of the same coin. He had hurt her because he thought she was weak, because he thought she was alone. An idea began to form in my mind. It was wild, it was dangerous, but it felt right. It felt like the only thing to do. I walked back into the living room and gently shook my sister awake. She looked up at me, her eyes still clouded with fear. "Chloe," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have a plan, but you have to trust me." I took her hand and led her to the large mirror in my hallway. We stood side by side, a mirror image of each other, one broken, one whole. "He did this to you because he thinks you're fragile," I said, my eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "He thinks you won't fight back." I took a deep breath, the plan solidifying into a promise. "So we're going to give him what he wants, a broken, scared wife. But it won't be you." I looked from her bruised face to my clear one, and then back again. "We're going to switch places." The plan hung in the air between us, terrifying and audacious. Chloe stared at our reflections, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a tiny, flickering spark of hope. To understand why this drastic plan was our only option, you have to understand Alex. You have to go back to the beginning. Chloe met Alex at a charity gala. I was supposed to go with her, but I was on a weekend training exercise with my military police unit. She called me the next day, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Jenna, I met someone," she'd gushed. "He's incredible, so handsome and smart, and he runs his own company. He's like something out of a movie." When I finally met him, I had to admit he was impressive. Alex was the kind of man who owned every room he walked into. He had a perfect smile, a firm handshake, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He treated Chloe like a queen, opening doors for her, buying her expensive gifts, and telling everyone how lucky he was to have found her. Everyone loved him. My parents, our friends, they were all charmed. But I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was like watching a movie where the music was just a little bit off. There were small things, tiny red flags that Chloe, blinded by love, didn't see. Once, at a dinner with our parents, Chloe was telling a funny story from her job at the art gallery. She got a small detail wrong, and Alex, with a warm smile, corrected her. "No, honey, it was a Tuesday, not a Wednesday. You always get those mixed up." It seemed harmless, but it was the way he did it. Publicly, under the guise of being helpful. It made her seem silly, forgetful. It made him seem like the one who was always right. Another time I called Chloe to see if she wanted to go on our usual weekend hike. She sounded hesitant. "Oh, I don't know, Jenna. Alex thinks it's better if we spend the weekends together, to build our foundation." He didn't like her spending time alone with me. He'd always say it was because he loved her so much he couldn't stand to be away from her. But it felt less like love and more like he was slowly, carefully, cutting the ropes that tied her to her own life. They got married a year later in a lavish ceremony that he paid for entirely. It was beautiful, but it also felt like another transaction. Another way for him to own her. After the wedding, the control tightened. He convinced her to quit her job at the gallery. "You don't need to work, my love," he'd said. "I want to take care of you. I want you to be able to relax and make our home beautiful." She thought it was romantic. I knew he was making her dependent on him. Then came the isolation. Her friends would call, and he would answer her phone. "Chloe's busy right now," he'd say politely. "We're just having a quiet night in." Soon her friends stopped calling as often. He had built a beautiful, luxurious cage around her, and she hadn't even realized she was locked in. The first time I suspected it was more than just control was about 6 months ago. I had dropped by their house unexpectedly. Alex answered the door, and he was clearly annoyed. "Chloe's not feeling well," he said, blocking the doorway. But over his shoulder I saw her for a split second. She was wearing a long-sleeved turtleneck, even though it was a warm day, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. The look on her face wasn't sickness. It was fear. I tried to talk to her about it later, but she brushed it off. "I was just tired, Jenna. You worry too much. Alex takes such good care of me." He had already gotten into her head, twisting reality until she believed the abuse was care, that the control was love. She was trapped, and she didn't even know how to ask for help. Until tonight. Tonight, he had finally gone too far. He had broken through her denial and her fear, and she had run. She had run to the only place he couldn't control, the only person he couldn't isolate her from. She had run to me. And now, looking at her broken reflection in the mirror, I knew that my sister's fairy tale had been a horror story all along, and the monster was about to meet his match. The first light of dawn crept through the windows, painting the living room in shades of gray. The storm had passed. Chloe had finally agreed to the plan. Her terror of returning to Alex outweighed only by the trust she had in me. We had one day to turn me into her. The preparation was intense, a mission briefing for the most important operation of my life. My military police training kicked in, and I became a machine of details and discipline. I made Chloe walk back and forth across my living room for an hour, studying her gait. She walked with a slight hesitation, her shoulders curved inward, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. I practiced it until it felt natural, forcing my own confident stride into submission. We sat at my kitchen table, a pot of coffee between us, and she talked for hours. I didn't just need facts, I needed to become her. I needed to know the tiny, intimate details of her life. What side of the bed did she sleep on? What was the name of the nosy neighbor's dog? What was the specific, annoying way Alex liked his coffee? Black, 2 sugars, stirred exactly 3 times? She drew me a map of the house from memory, marking every room, every closet, every squeaky floorboard. She told me his schedule. He left for work at 7:30 a.m. on the dot. He came home at 6 p.m. He expected dinner to be on the table at 7 wang. Any deviation from this routine made him angry. "He'll test you," she whispered, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. "He'll ask you about things. Little things from our past, to make sure you're paying attention to him. He did it to me all the time." I made notes, filling a small notebook with the architecture of her life and his tyranny. I learned about the fight they had last year over the color she painted the guest room, the name of the restaurant where he proposed, the song that was playing during their first dance. I absorbed her memories, making them my own. The hardest part came in the afternoon. It was time to recreate the bruises. It felt like a grotesque art project. Chloe sat beside me, her face now clean and pale, and guided my hand. "The one under my eye was darker on the inside," she said, her voice barely audible. "That's where his ring hit me." A fresh wave of cold fury washed over me, but I pushed it down. I needed a steady hand. I used a palette of purples, blues, and a sickly yellow-green, dabbing the makeup onto my own skin. With each brushstroke, I felt my sister's pain. I looked in the mirror, and my face transformed into a canvas of his violence. When we were done, I looked exactly like she had when she arrived at my door, bruised, battered, broken. Chloe stared at me, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "It's perfect," she whispered, and the words sounded like a curse. Finally, it was time. We swapped clothes. I put on her simple dress and cardigan, clothes that felt too soft, too vulnerable. She put on my jeans and a hoodie, and it was like watching her put on a suit of armor. I took her car keys and her house key. The small gold wedding band on her finger was too tight for me, a small mercy. Alex had insisted she never take it off. I would have to say I'd lost it if he asked. I walked to her car, my movements now hesitant, my shoulders slightly hunched. I was no longer Jenna, I was Chloe. The drive to their house was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The neighborhood was beautiful, with perfect lawns and big, friendly-looking houses. It was a perfect facade, hiding a dark secret. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. I took a deep breath. The image of my sister's terrified face burned into my mind. This was for her. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent and immaculate. It smelled faintly of bleach and fear. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the quiet hall. "Chloe?" His voice came from the living room. It was cold and sharp. I walked towards the sound, my heart pounding a steady soldier's rhythm. He was standing by the fireplace, dressed in an expensive suit, looking impatient. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the makeup bruises on my face. He was expecting to see fear. He was expecting tears, apologies, begging. I just looked back at him, my expression blank. I let him see the bruises, but I didn't let him see any fear. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. It was a tiny crack in his perfect, controlled world. He was looking at his wife, but he was seeing a stranger. The game had begun. I stood before him, a ghost in my sister's clothes. Alex stared at me, his jaw tight. He was a predator who had cornered his prey, but the prey wasn't acting right. I wasn't crying. I wasn't trembling. I just stood there, my silence a wall he hadn't expected. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I dropped my gaze to the floor, just as Chloe had told me she always did. "I went for a drive," I whispered, making my voice sound small and shaky. "I needed to think." "You needed to think," he repeated, mocking me. He took a step closer, invading my space. I could smell his expensive cologne. "And what did you decide? Did you decide that you're going to start listening to me? Did you decide to stop being so stupid?" I gave a small, submissive nod. "Yes, Alex." My obedience seemed to satisfy him. He grunted and walked away. "Good. Now go get changed. We have the Hendersons coming over for dinner tonight. Don't you dare embarrass me." I scurried upstairs, my heart pounding not with fear, but with adrenaline. The first test was over. He believed I was Chloe. Now, my real mission could begin. The next morning, as soon as the sound of his car faded down the street, I transformed from a timid mouse into a soldier on a reconnaissance mission. My first priority was surveillance. I had brought a small kit with me, hidden in the lining of my purse. It contained 3 tiny, high-definition cameras, the kind used in covert operations. The first one went in his home office. It was a room Chloe had described as his fortress, a place she was barely allowed to enter. I placed the camera on a high bookshelf, nestled between 2 thick legal books, its tiny lens perfectly positioned to see his desk and his computer screen. The second camera went in the living room, hidden in the plastic leaves of a fake plant on the mantelpiece. It had a clear view of the entire room, especially the area where he took his most important phone calls, pacing back and forth like a king. The third was the riskiest. I put it in their bedroom, tucked into the back of the digital alarm clock on his bedside table. It was a gamble, but Chloe had told me he often made late-night calls in bed after she was asleep. With the cameras in place, I began to search. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just gathering intelligence. My military police training had taught me what to look for, things that are out of place, things that are hidden. I started in his office. His desk was neat, almost sterile, but in the bottom drawer beneath a stack of old tax returns, I found a second ledger. Not the official company one, but a small black notebook filled with handwritten notes. It was a mess of names, dates, and numbers. I didn't understand what it all meant, but I knew it was a secret. I took out a small digital camera from my kit and photographed every single page. Next, I went through his computer. Most of his files were protected by passwords he had never shared with Chloe. But people like Alex, people who think they are smarter than everyone else, often make simple mistakes. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried his mother's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried the name of his first company, a failed startup he was deeply ashamed of and never talked about. I was in. I spent the next 2 hours creating a mirror image of his entire hard drive on a small encrypted device, emails, financial records, hidden folders. I took everything. When I was done, I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I erased my digital footprints. I was a ghost. I had moved through his most private spaces, and he would never know I had been there. That evening, when he came home, I was in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. I was Chloe again, the timid, broken wife. He seemed more relaxed than the night before. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken his wife's spirit and put her back in her place. He had no idea that while he was at work, playing the part of a successful businessman, I had been in his home, planting the seeds of his destruction. He thought he was the master of this house. He didn't realize there was a mouse in his walls, and she was quietly chewing through the foundations of his entire world. For a week, I lived a double life. By day, I was a spy in my own home, meticulously gathering the threads of Alex's secret life. By night, I was Chloe, a ghost of a woman who cooked his meals, endured his cutting remarks, and never met his eye. It was exhausting, playing the part of a victim while my mind was whirring with strategy. The evidence I had collected was now safely stored on an encrypted drive, hidden away at my apartment where the real Chloe was waiting, healing. It was time to see what would happen if I gave the web a little shake. Using a new, untraceable email address from a burner phone I had hidden, I composed a simple message. It was addressed to the chairman of the board at Alex's company, a man whose email I had found in the computer files. The subject line was just one word: concerned. The body of the email was short and vague, designed to create panic without revealing my hand. You should take a closer look at the financials for the Phoenix project. There are irregularities. A good place to start would be the invoices from a supplier called Apex Global Imports. I attached a single document to the email. It was a scan of one of the pages from Alex's secret ledger, a page that showed a huge payment to this Apex company, a company that, after a little digging, I had discovered didn't actually exist. It was a shell corporation. I pressed send. The message was a single, anonymous stone dropped into the calm pond of Alex's professional life. Now, I just had to wait for the ripples. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Alex came home like a thundercloud. He threw his briefcase on the floor with a loud bang that made me jump. A real jump, not a practiced one. His face was dark with fury. "What did you do?" he snarled, storming into the kitchen where I was chopping vegetables. I looked up, my face a mask of confusion. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "Someone sent an email to the board, an anonymous email. They're asking questions, Chloe. They're starting an investigation into my project." I shrank back, making myself look small and scared. "An email? I don't know anything about that, Alex, I swear." He stared at me, his eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of deception. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at anything that moved. He saw my fear, my trembling hands, and it seemed to convince him. He couldn't imagine that the weak, pathetic woman standing before him could be capable of such a thing. "Useless," he muttered, turning away in disgust. "You're completely useless." He spent the rest of the night on the phone, his voice a low, angry growl. I could hear him pacing in his office, trying to do damage control. The foundation of his perfect world was cracking, and he had no idea where the attack was coming from. His paranoia made him volatile. The next evening, he was even angrier. He had been questioned by the board for hours. He came home drunk, reeking of whiskey and rage. He was looking for a target, and I was the only one there. He followed me into the living room, backing me into a corner. "This is your fault," he hissed, his words slurred. "Somehow, this is your fault. You bring me bad luck." He reached out and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. It was the moment I had been preparing for. The real Chloe would have cried out, would have tried to pull away. I did not. In one smooth, practiced motion, I dropped my weight, twisted my arm, and broke his grip. It was a simple wrist lock release, one of the first things they teach you in military police training. It's all about leverage, not strength. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He stared at his hand, then at me. The look on his face was priceless. It was pure, unadulterated confusion. In his mind, what had just happened was impossible. A mouse doesn't fight back against the cat. How did you do that?" he stammered. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, my face still a mask of fear, but my eyes, for the first time, holding his gaze. He was seeing a crack in my performance, a glimpse of the real person underneath. He was starting to question everything. The next day, he was placed on a mandatory leave of absence from his job, pending the results of a full forensic audit. His world wasn't just cracking anymore, it was beginning to crumble, and he was trapped inside with a woman he no longer understood at all. Being forced to stay home was the worst possible punishment for a man like Alex. His company was his kingdom, his office, his throne room. Now, he was a king in exile, trapped within the four walls of his own house. He spent his days pacing like a caged tiger, his phone glued to his ear, his voice a constant, desperate murmur as he tried to salvage his reputation. He was losing control, and it was driving him mad. The nights were the worst. The alcohol became his only comfort. He would sit in his expensive leather armchair in the dark, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. He was a man watching his own empire burn, and he was looking for someone to blame. I continued to play my part, the quiet, obedient wife. I cooked his meals, which he barely touched. I cleaned the house, which he no longer noticed. My silence, which had once been a sign of my submission, now seemed to agitate him. He would watch me as I moved through the house, his eyes narrowed with a suspicion he couldn't quite name. The incident where I broke his grip had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and it was growing in the fertile ground of his paranoia. The confession came on a Tuesday night. It was raining again, the sound drumming against the windows, just as it had on the night Chloe came to me. It felt like the story was coming full circle. Alex was drunker than I had ever seen him. He had received a call earlier that evening, and from the fragments of the conversation I overheard, I knew the auditors had found the shell company, Apex Global Imports. The net was closing. He stumbled into the living room where I was pretending to read a book. He stood over me, swaying slightly, a half-empty bottle of whiskey dangling from his hand. "They found it," he slurred, his voice a mixture of despair and rage. "They found Apex." I looked up at him, my face arranged into an expression of mild confusion. "Apex? Don't you act stupid with me," he roared, pointing a shaky finger at me. "You know what I'm talking about. The money I moved." He collapsed into the armchair opposite me, his head in his hands. He started talking, not really to me, but to the room, to himself. He was a man confessing to a ghost. He saw me not as a person, but as a piece of furniture, a silent witness to his downfall. "It was supposed to be perfect," he mumbled into his hands. "Just a little bit from the Phoenix Project. No one was ever supposed to notice. It was my money anyway. I'm the one who made this company. I deserve it." He looked up, his eyes unfocused and wild. "I needed it. Do you have any idea how much it costs to live like this? The house, the cars, the things she wants?" He didn't say Tiffany's name, but he didn't have to. She needs things, shiny things. I had to keep her happy. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "And the others, the men I borrowed from, they don't care about audits. They just want their money back. With interest." He leaned forward, his eyes finally focusing on me. "I hid it. I hid the money. Not in a bank. Somewhere safe. Somewhere no one would ever think to look." He was boasting now, his drunken ego trying to claw back some sense of control, of being smarter than everyone else. "It's in the old place," he whispered, a conspiratorial gleam in his eye. "The place we went that first summer, the old boathouse, under the floorboards, all of it. They'll never find it there." He had just told me everything. He had admitted to the embezzlement. He had confessed to moving the money. He had told me exactly where it was hidden. And all the while, the tiny, silent lens of the camera hidden in the fake plant on the mantelpiece was recording every word, every gesture, every drunken, self-pitying admission. He had just written and signed his own confession. He thought he was talking to his weak, broken wife. He had no idea he was speaking directly to the jury. The game wasn't just over. He had lost in a way he couldn't even comprehend. The morning after his confession, the house was eerily quiet. Alex was passed out in the armchair, the empty whiskey bottle lying on the floor beside him. He looked pathetic, a fallen king in a rumpled suit. I moved around him silently, retrieving the memory card from the camera on the mantelpiece. It was the final piece of the puzzle. I had everything. I slipped out of the house before he woke up. The drive away from that perfect, manicured neighborhood felt like a liberation. I was no longer Chloe. I was Jenna again, and I was on my final mission. I didn't go to the local police. My time in the military police had taught me that complex cases require a specific kind of expertise. I called Detective Harding, a man I had worked with once before, a sharp, no-nonsense cop who trusted evidence above all else. I met him at a small, anonymous coffee shop halfway between my town and his. I laid everything out on the table, the encrypted drive with Alex's entire digital life, the photos of the secret ledger, the bank statements for the Shell Corporation, and the pictures I had taken of Chloe's bruised face on that first night. The last thing I showed him was the video from the night before. We watched it on my laptop. Harding sat perfectly still, his face unreadable, as Alex's drunken confession filled the quiet coffee shop. When it was over, he closed the laptop slowly. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something beyond professional interest in his eyes. It was respect. "You have him," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have him 10 different ways." The rest happened quickly. Harding assembled a team. They didn't just want Alex for embezzlement, they wanted him for the assault, and they wanted to find the stolen money. The plan was executed with swift, legal precision. They arrested him at the house that afternoon. I was told he was completely blindsided, still nursing a hangover and trying to call his lawyers. He was arrogant and belligerent at first, demanding to know what the charges were. When they told him they had a warrant to search the old boathouse, the color drained from his face. He finally understood he was trapped. As they were leading him out of his house in handcuffs, a car pulled up to the curb. My car. I had called Chloe and told her it was time. The back door opened and she stepped out. She was no longer the trembling, broken woman who had collapsed in my arms. Her bruises had faded to faint yellow shadows, almost invisible. She was wearing my jeans and a simple, strong jacket. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were clear and steady. She stood tall, her shoulders back. She looked like me. She looked like herself again. She walked to my side, and we stood there together, a united front. Alex stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at me, standing beside the police cars. Then he looked at Chloe, standing on the perfect green lawn. He looked back and forth between us, his mind struggling to process the impossible. He saw the same face, the same woman, in 2 places at once. The confusion on his face was absolute. It was the look of a man whose entire reality had just been shattered into a million pieces. He finally understood. He hadn't just been outsmarted, he had been replaced. The woman he had beaten and terrorized was safe, and the woman he had confessed his darkest secrets to was the one who had brought him down. He hadn't just abused his wife, he had abused the wrong woman's sister. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension. Chloe reached out and took my hand. Her grip was firm. We watched as they put him in the back of the police car. We didn't smile. We didn't say a word. We just stood there, 2 halves of a whole, finally free. The car pulled away, and the nightmare was over. It was time to heal.